Vaush and Destiny are what people tend to refer to as debate bros. I know that there's been a ton of discussions, arguments even, ironically, about the utility of online political debates. Usually the argument goes like, oh, it's all just performative stuff. Oh, they're all just engaging in hyperbole, removing the nuances of the subject. It's just a shouting match. You're not winning anyone over that. Is that too radical for you? Fine. Let's have better unions. Let's start from there. Anything, literally anything to improve the well-being of workers. Basically, there are layers to this issue where if you didn't grow up in an environment where transgenders are normalized, it takes time to ease people into it. Like for instance, I used to be a trans medicalist. Hello there. Welcome to the Pit of Tangents. We'll be picking up from where we left off with getting exposed to Left Discourse as an Indonesian. Couldn't have thought of a shorter title, huh? Hopefully, this is going to be the last one because I would very much like to start diving into specific topics. Believe me when I say that there's a lot to go through, whether it is things happening in the world or just conceptual stuff, really. In this segment, I'd like to talk about the left-leaning content creators that I've been exposed to, focusing on the main things that I've learned from them. There's actually something a bit amusing about this. Like, right after I finish recording Left Discourse Part 2, the alt-right pipeline experience, there's this content creator, Noah Samson, who uploaded this video called A Practical Guide to Leftist YouTube. It was a very useful video, I have to say. Quite surprised that no one has done that before, at least not to my knowledge. Go ahead and check it out. I won't be doing what they did, although there's bound to be some similarities. I intend to frame this video, the difference is that I intend to frame this video as my personal experience on what it's like to learn about politics through the unconventional media that is social media. I can understand if you have some reservation with this notion, especially when I tell you that what I'm talking about is not just universities publishing their public lectures online. These are people who, some of them have a relevant degree to what they're talking about, some of them don't. Some of them have relevant jobs on the side. Some of them are just full-time content creators. However, if there's anything that I could learn from this experience, is the unimaginable power that one could have if they spend their spare time reading a bunch of research articles from academic journals, or if they read or watch the news on a daily basis. Information is so accessible these days that getting a degree is starting to feel like a mere formality to legitimize your understanding of a certain subject. I mean, there's only so much that you can learn from school. I feel like they serve more as building blocks for you to expand yourself. Or, as the head of the department where I got my bachelor's usually says, university is where you learn how to learn. With that in mind, on with the show. As I've mentioned in the last segment, my tipping point was when I got exposed to this other socialism versus capitalism debate, only this time it was between Vaush and Destiny. I think I've hinted at Vaush a couple of times in this mini-series, if you want to call it. From his coconut analogy, when he was debating the Adam Kokesh, the former US Libertarian Party presidential candidate. Goddamn, that's a mouthful. His videos of Jordan Peterson and Steven Crowder that he has debated Charlie Kirk. Suffice to say, I'm a bit of a fan of his. Just to bring you up to speed, Vaush is a political live streamer. You can find him on YouTube or Twitch, or you can also find him on his website, vaush.gg, where you can participate in his chat while he streams. Vaush streams almost every day, where I would either watch him live or watch his VOD. Video on demand, if you don't know. It really depends on when he starts, because, well, US time difference with Indonesia. Him being a live streamer is probably the reason why he's the person whose content I spend the most time with. He just puts more stuff out there compared to your video essayists, which I will get to in a sec. I understand that Vaush is a pretty contentious figure, to say the least. And to be fair, yeah, he's had some pretty yikesy takes in the past, which he has addressed in several videos, mind you, or at least tried to, depending on how you look at it. He has also scaled back a lot of his edginess. He's a lot more reserved in his debates. Like, around a year ago, his debate approach is more up in your face. Like, you can definitely get the "I'm going to end your career" vibe to some extent. Nowadays, he's more inclined to try and understand what the other person is saying, which is, of course, a welcome change. He would still meme every now and then, but that's actually one of the things that makes him fun to listen to, in my opinion. Sure, he really knows how to create discourse. Like, recently he got a lot of flack when he said, given the lack of efforts that's been done, it is inevitable that when the US pull back from Afghanistan, Taliban is bound to seize power, to which people consider him to be very unsympathetic to the struggles of the people of Afghanistan. Another thing is when he debated this other content creator, Professor Flowers, about black nationalism. Yeah, to which he pointed out that the way that she phrased the extent to which indigenous people could decide what to do about their colonizers is almost akin to that of those who wish to have an ethno-state. To which people obviously reacted by saying, oh, he's a racist, he's a white supremacist, and so on. However, despite all the controversies, legitimate or otherwise, I do think that he has some qualities that make him very appealing as a content creator. There's a reason why he's been able to build his community so quickly. Personally, and I understand how trivial this sounds, but I find his main appeal to be his voice. Like, I know I can hear him for hours on end, which, to be perfectly honest, I have. As someone who's very sensitive to sound, your tone, your cadence, they play a huge factor in determining whether I would stick to your content. Of course, yeah, I mean, by virtue of him being the first political live streamer I was exposed to, that also plays a huge role into that. So, first mover advantage, let's call it that. The same applies to Destiny as well. I know. Apart from Vaush, I've spent quite a lot of time watching his content, mostly when he's debating conservatives or far-right people. I'll admit that I mostly only watch his videos though, because for the most part, like he streams way longer than Vaush. We're talking like more than 8 hours here. And to fill in the gaps, he usually plays games that, unfortunately, I'm just not particularly interested in. He's also had plenty of controversies. He's been banned off of Twitch a couple of times. He's been banned off of Twitter as well. Most of these incidents can be linked to how he can be, well, so unnecessarily inflammatory and hyperbolic at times, which you can interpret that any way you want. I understand that he's an even more contentious character than Vaush, and there's like a shit ton of drama there, including the ones that involve Vaush. But nevertheless, he's still one of the main left-leaning content creators that I was exposed to. I can't deny the fact that I learned a lot of things about how to argue against far-right people, pointing out the absurdity of their beliefs and everything. Anyway, to tie this back to the debate, which actually plays into why I gravitate towards these two content creators, is that when they had the debate, it wasn't held in an auditorium with a live audience or anything. These are just people in their homes duking it out, which makes things a lot more grounded and approachable. Vaush and Destiny are what people tend to refer to as debate bros. I know that there's been a ton of discussions, arguments even, ironically, about the utility of online political debates. Usually the argument goes like, oh, it's all just performative stuff. Oh, they're all just engaging in hyperbole, removing the nuances of the subject. It's just a shouting match. You're not winning anyone over that. And so on. Personally, I don't see it that way. Like, when I was taking my undergrad, one of the many things that I find to be most effective in broadening my view is whenever I get to sit down with my colleagues and actually discuss the things that we've just learned. And yes, this sometimes leads to debates where we have to reconcile our differing views. It's simply the nature of the knowledge that's being laid out. In one instance, when you're reading a book, when you're watching or listening to a lecture, or in the context of content creators, the more video essay types, it's more of a one-way interaction. You're there to process the information that's being given to you. If you're not a very reflective person, it's really hard not to take all of this information at face value. Even if the source of information takes into account every possible contradiction, even then, you're still limited by your own exposures. Now, to be clear, I am not trying to make the claim that one is objectively better than the other. The lectures, the video essays, they can serve as the building blocks to your belief. Now, the debates, on the other hand, they can serve as a way to ensure that you don't end up in an echo chamber, where you are blinded to the possibilities that your belief could lead to adverse outcomes. Another utility that I find is that, well, for the most part, through these debates, you're bound to have a better understanding of what the people on the other side believes in. Specifically whenever these live streamers are having viewer call-ins or debating their chats even. During these interactions, you'll get to see knee-jerk reactions, which usually represents the full extent of one's understanding of a particular issue. At the same time, however, you should not solely rely on debates as well, without at least having some level of understanding. Otherwise, your arguments are prone to come off as mere platitudes without substance, and you'll be one step away from getting owned in a marketplace of ideas, and that's not a good look. Anyway, to get back to the debate, Vaush mentioned something that is very interesting, and that is when he mentioned this thing called worker co-ops. What is that, you might ask? A worker co-op is basically a workplace where every individual worker has a right to participate in the business decision-making process. Every worker has a vote. This is why it is also often referred to as workplace democracy. I'll make a separate video specifically about this subject. I already have a script that's like 80% ready, I think. I'll probably record that after publishing this video. Co-ops is a very interesting concept to me, as I think it could help alleviate a lot of the things that makes our current business structure very one-sided at times. I don't want to spoil too much that it would render my future video redundant, but the TLDW is that democracy good, the more democracy, the better. What is up for a vote, you might ask? Honestly, everything. From what to produce, how to produce, where to sell it, at what price, to whom, and also, and this is the most important part, how much they're getting paid. I see that this is a good avenue for workers to improve their well-being, but also so that they have more agency in the workplace to plant some sense of belonging, which, mind you, could trickle down, so to say, to higher productivity. I say this because it has almost become a given that you need to do heaps amount of overtime in order for you to get some semblance of a decent life. Either that, or you need to do multiple jobs, or you need to have a side hustle. This is despite the fact that CEOs, they could get paid 350 times higher than your typical worker. Your initial reaction might be, are you sure? You want these employees, these people who don't have the knowledge on how to run a business, to make these type of decisions? I understand if you have some reservation, which I share to some extent. This is something that I intend to cover in the future. Like, even in the current script that I have right now, it's more theoretical than practical. The most expedient solution, which already has precedence by the way, is to vote for your managers. Want to scale it back a bit? Let's adopt what Germany has. They have this thing called Mitbestimmung, which I'm pretty sure I've butchered just now, which roughly translates to co-determination. Essentially, large companies are obligated to allow their workers to appoint 30% of their C-suite. Is that too radical for you? Fine, let's have better unions. Let's start from there. Anything, literally anything to improve the well-being of workers. Something to emphasize here is that worker co-ops is not exactly a new concept. It has existed for centuries. In fact, it has been picking up tractions around the world due to the fact that workers are feeling increasingly disenfranchised by the conventional business structure. What about Indonesia, you might ask? Well, we have a Ministry of Co-ops. You heard that right. We have an entire ministerial body in charge of co-ops. To close this off, I believe I first heard this from Vaush. We've generally accepted that democracy is the way to go. It's how we should run our government. Usually people would refer to this quote from Churchill, who said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other that have been tried." I imagine he was referring to monarchies or other authoritarian systems. In doing so, we've compromised some degree of efficiency by taking the time to consider everyone's perspective. Of course, I'm setting aside the unimaginable flaws that we have in our current democracy here. With that considered, why is it that, in large part, we still retain an autocratic system in a workplace where you barely have a say in how the business is run? Why is it that most of the decisions are relegated to either the owner or the board of directors? Why is it that the workers don't get to have a say when they contribute a huge amount of time and energy, and sometimes even literal blood and tears, just to keep the business afloat? I don't know. Doesn't seem fair to me. Another topic that has captured my attention in the first few months that I watched Vaush was transgenderism. I slightly touched on this when we talked about pronouns, Bill C-16, and the whole sex and gender are two different things. There are several avenues to this topic which I have written down, starting from, pointing out that sex and gender are two different things. There's also the bathroom discussion, whether you're allowed to go to the bathroom based on the gender that you identify as, whether you need to go through sex reassignment surgery or SRS, or to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria to then be considered valid. Usually these people would be labeled as transmedicalist or truscom. There is also trans athlete, whether you're even eligible to participate in sports based on the gender that you identify as, or the eligibility of puberty blockers, a treatment that postpones puberty in children, such as inhibiting the release of sex hormones so that the changes in your body during puberty would be more aligned with the gender identity you wish to identify as. Basically, there are layers to this issue, where if you didn't grow up in an environment where transgenders are normalized, it takes time to ease people into it. Like, for instance, I used to be a transmedicalist. Initially, I thought that transmedicalism is limited to those who believe that one needs to go through sex reassignment surgery in order for one to be considered valid. But turns out, to even believe that trans people have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria before then be considered as valid is also heavily leaning towards that. For those who don't know, the American Psychiatric Association defines gender dysphoria as a psychological distress that results from an incongruence between one's sex assigned at birth and one's gender identity. Now, intuitively, I can understand how one could end up with the conclusion that if you're trans, then you must have had gender dysphoria. It's kind of by definition, right? That you would only be compelled to be trans if there is a mismatch between what you were assigned at birth and what you wish to identify as. The thing is, by doing so, and there's no getting around this, I am basically saying that if you're trans, you are mentally ill. Not only this infantilizes people who do suffer from gender dysphoria, I am basically falling into the same line of thinking as how most people still do to this day about homosexuality, that it is nothing but a mental illness. So yeah, yikes. So, what should one do if they're trans? Well, there are actually several domains in which they could pursue gender affirmation, basically to resolve the aforementioned incongruences, such as social affirmation, changing one's name and pronouns, legal affirmation, changing gender markers on one's government-issued documents, medical affirmation, pubertal suppression or gender-affirming hormones, surgical affirmation, vaginoplasty, facial feminization surgery, breast augmentation, masculine chest reconstruction, etc. Now, something to note here is that the APA emphasizes that transgenders don't have to go through all avenues of gender affirmation. In the future, I'll probably delve deeper into this subject because I would really like to learn about it. Of course, I'll plug in some things about how things are in Indonesia here and there. Obviously, trans discourse is not as mainstream as it is in other countries. Not that I would only talk about trans issues, like I would also cover the LGBTQ community in general. Like, for instance, I would really like to learn more about non-binaries. Of course, it's impossible to talk about online trans discourse without mentioning ContraPoints. In the political sphere, she's more of a video essayist rather than a live streamer like Vaush. She's a left-leaning YouTuber, obviously, who covers a wide array of topics, packaged in such a way that makes it very exclusive and well-made. I mean, we're talking about feature-length movies type of deal here, with different sets and different costumes. Can we take a moment here? It still amazes me that YouTube content creation could reach such level of craftsmanship. I mean, we're not talking about official news outlets making documentaries. These are just people supported by a team of editors and script doctors. That's it. Sometimes the audience can also take part in the creation process, making it a very communal experience. Like, for instance, some of these content creators would have their own Discord server where they can ask their members like, hey, I'm currently in the middle of making this video. Could you recommend me some materials, some articles, some sources? They can also make a public tweet about it. Or say if you're live streaming and you're covering a certain subject, someone in chat would probably propose like, hey, maybe you want to read this. Or say if you're debating someone, sometimes the chat will also support you by doing that. Anyway, back to ContraPoints. I'll admit that I've been getting video recommendations of her for quite a while. Probably even back when I was still in my Jordan Peterson phase. The main reason why I wasn't too keen on watching her videos was, funny enough, her sets and costumes. It was a bit too much for me initially. Like, I didn't even watch her video. It was simply her thumbnails. You heard me right. It was just her thumbnails. At the time, I was recommended the West, the aesthetics, pronouns, and I think the apocalypse as well. Feel free to call me out for feeling put off by someone using bisexual lighting and glitters. Things changed when ContraPoints appeared in one of Vaush's live streams, and suffice to say, he spoke really highly of her. I believe it was Vermin, Vaush's content manager, who mentioned a specific video of hers called Opulence. That was the first video that I watched, and that got me hooked into binge watching all of her videos. Check it out. I think it's a really good intro to her content, even though it's not really related to trans issues.
Let's be bad.
Her older videos related to trans issues are quite interesting to watch, as she would usually present it as several people, which are all her. Like, it's pretty cool that she's been able to sync that up. So several people having a discussion about a certain topic, which often feels like an internal dialogue that one could have as they try to navigate themselves around trans issues. I would highly recommend them. The way that she approached her videos are more subtle. Like, she's not dictating what is right. She would pose questions. She would present perspectives from both sides. All in all, it makes her work to be more persuasive. Contrapoints definitely fall more under the video essayist type. Even though she has been doing frequent live streams of her playing games like Stardew Valley and Resident Evil. I know, quite a range. Other video essays that I've spent quite some time with is PhilosophyTube. She's definitely a household name when it comes to left-leaning content creators. Similar to ContraPoints, they would usually be grouped under this thing called BreadTube. As the name suggests, what she covers is, well, philosophy. So what she would normally do is she would take a cultural issue and contextualize it from a philosophical perspective. What I find to be most interesting about her is that she still keeps her pre-transition videos. I would definitely recommend you watching her transition video. It really encapsulates her thinking process. There's also H-Bomber Guy, another BreadTuber. He does a variety of things, I have to say, including game critique. He also does criticism of right-wing demagogues. You've probably seen the "Sell Your Houses to Aquaman" clip, where it's actually from his video about climate change. Recently, he's also made a very interesting deep dive into the anti-vax movement, uncovering this doctor who's like the father of anti-vax, who basically made this allegation that there's this vaccine that the UK government would normally administer to children, which could increase the likelihood of them becoming mentally challenged. He went through the doctor's study, which is basically the crux of the entire controversy. I say study because as you actually go through the study, you would realize that it's basically riddled with shoddy approaches, bias sampling, and so on. Like, I wouldn't fault you for thinking that the study was conducted by some high school student or something. Another interesting about him is that he once held this charity stream. He was playing Donkey Kong, and the charity was for trans rights, and he actually got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, the congresswoman from the Democratic Party of the United States. He got her to make an appearance. Like, she actually appeared during the live stream. It's amazing to think that we've reached a point where politicians would engage with live streamers. Like, I think this is an avenue that politicians should explore, because it would definitely help them reach out to the young generation, which, suffice to say, are mostly disaffected by politics. Of course, as a left-leaning person, your validity is measured solely based on the extent to which you understand the so-called theory. And by theory, I mean whether or not you've read our leftist theories, like Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, just to name a few. Much to my dismay, I am very averse to reading. Fortunately, though, there are content creators who do it for us. For theory-oriented videos, I would recommend Sexeasy. Like, he has a series called Marks and Minutes, something that I've been wanting to watch. Maybe I can do that while live streaming, like live reacting and all that, on Twitch under the politics category. Be on the lookout, eh? Aside from Sexeasy, there is also Radical Reviewer, which is someone who does book reviews. I've mentioned that I'd like to watch their videos covering anarchist literatures, although I have watched their video covering Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, and holy shit, that was a delusional piece of work. I've watched Fountainhead, Ayn Rand's other major work, and goddamn, that didn't age well. The messaging was so ham-fisted, not to mention the weird dynamic between the protagonist and the female love interest, and the fucking ending, like, which will get you rolling on the fucking floor for how insane and nonsensical it was. Anyway, back to the video essays. For more economic-oriented content, I would recommend Unlearning Economics. I know, ironic. They actually started their channel because they acknowledged this gap in left-leaning spaces who normally stay away from economics. Or at least when they do, there's a tendency for them to be misinformed. They rose to prominence because they made videos specifically criticizing other left-leaning content creators, such as Philosophy Tube and Sean, another breadtuber. Go ahead and check them out while you're at it. So, criticizing these content creators who have tried to take a jab at making economic analyses. Sadly, their content is pretty far in between, although I would definitely recommend you watching their criticism of Steven Pinker, an economist who... What's that? He's not an economist. He's a Canadian psychologist? Then why the hell did he make an entire book about that, like claiming that the economy is doing fine and that climate change isn't real? Are you sure? He's been referenced like tons of times by right-wing people. Oh god, these people are so weird. Technically, there are content creators who do cover economic issues, although they tend to have a more formal approach. For instance, New Economic Thinking. I got exposed to them when I stumbled upon their video series, their series featuring Hajin Chang, a world-renowned economist. Come to think of it, I should probably watch it anyway. Like, I shouldn't allow the formality to get in the way, especially when it has a lot to offer. There's also Democracy at Work, who has several segments, such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff. There's also Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey, and Capitalism Hits Home with Harriet Fraud. Fraud? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Oh god, this is getting really long, isn't it? I do apologize. Up next is Some More News. I've mentioned them as the nail to the coffin for me to basically not even consider watching Ben Shapiro. They generally cover a series of news over a certain topic, presented in a semi-comedic way. There's also Mia Mulder. She does a pretty good job at dissecting trans issues, I have to say. She also released a video recently about the science of psychiatry, which I would definitely recommend you watching. Tara Mooney, someone who I was actually exposed to due to the recommendation from Noah Samson's video. So thank you for that. She generally covers feminist issues. Like, I think her videos on pick-me boys and pick-me girls are especially interesting. She also has her own podcast called Grazing Hell, which you can watch on YouTube or Spotify or your other podcast platforms. She had these 2 episodes covering political lesbianism, which I honestly find very thought-provoking. You should definitely go watch or listen. That's it. Yeah, who am I kidding? There's more. We've only covered the video essays. We haven't talked about the live streamers. For our live streamers, apart from Destiny and Vaush, of course it's impossible to not talk about Hasanabi. He's probably the largest political live streamer right now. So large that he's actually one of the top streamers on Twitch, getting an average viewer of 20,000 every day. Also, he's also a pretty big boy, like 6'4". God damn. I don't really tune into his live streams because, oh my god, his live streams can last for an eternity, like more than 8 hours per day. Usually I would watch his stream highlights on YouTube, either on his official YouTube channel or in one of his clip chimping industrial complex. Another one is Lumiru, who's bound to be one of the most wholesome content creators. Like every time I tune into their live streams, there's always this positive energy. They usually cover gender issues, although they would expand to other progressive issues as well. What I really appreciate about them is that sometimes they would dedicate an entire stream covering men's issues. Because hey, like, men are also victims of the patriarchy. Of course, we shouldn't forget about the Majority Report with Sam Cedar. Probably the only content creator with the radio talk show aesthetic that I still watch every now and then. Especially when they're having viewer call-ins from right libertarians. I used to watch a bit of Kyle Kolinsky from Secular Talk, but definitely a lot less nowadays. The most recent addition to my list of live streamers is Pixel Smixel, an Australian live streamer on Twitch who I've started watching because of her appearance on a debate panel that has had Vaush in it as well. She covers the news, both global and Australian news. She has a degree in psychology, if I'm not mistaken, so she does that as well. I think she had a few-day session covering Freud and Lacan. Lacan, is that how you pronounce it? And every time she's about to end a stream, she would have this karaoke session. But the most crucial difference is that she actually streams when I'm awake, when I'm still awake and not busy working. So for once, I can actually interact with her chat and to some extent with her as well. Speaking of debate panels, if you're interested in that, which, enter at your own risk, you can check out Dylan Burns TV and Prime Kai's. It can get rowdy at times, which is to be expected if you've got like 6 people in the same place whose jobs are to literally talk non-stop. Like, you're lucky enough if you can get a 2-person debate that can go long cordially. Okay, we've covered people from YouTube, Twitch. That leaves us with Twitter. This is actually where I find a lot of people covering economic issues. We're talking about professionals and academicians in the field. Suffice to say, Twitter has come a long way from simply being a place for you to rant about your day. What I find most fascinating about this whole thing is that at times it would feel as if they've come down from their ivory tower by engaging in Twitter discourse. Which is very helpful, by the way, because it helps to bridge the gap between public understanding and what's actually being talked about in academia. Most importantly, of course, this means that they're helping to weed out misinformation. Like, you'd be surprised to find people actually posting research findings from academic journals to substantiate their claims. So who are these people? Of course, it's impossible to talk about econ Twitter personas without mentioning Medlock. Medlock is known for advocating for better taxation. So, when conservatives simp for the police force or the military, Medlock would simp for the IRS. Which, for those who don't know, the IRS is the Internal Revenue Service, the tax collecting authority in the United States. There used to be this other person named Sudosha or Liz, who basically does the same thing as Medlock. Unfortunately, they've decided to stop tweeting because they find it to be too addicting and mentally draining. I wouldn't be surprised, however, if it turns out they've actually re-emerged under a different name. Another one would be No Opinion, who's a columnist from Bloomberg. You can also find them on Substack, which is an online digital newsletter. go ahead and check it out. There's also Matt Brunig, who's actually the founder of the People's Policy Project, a progressive think tank in the US. Jackson Hinkle? Damn it, I keep getting them mixed up. Jason Hickle, I hope? Who's Jason Hickle? I think it's Jason Hickle, who's a staunch supporter of the concept of degrowth. There's also Arindrajit Dube, who I'm pretty sure I've mispronounced. I'm totally sorry, sir. Who's an economics professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, whose primary focus is, it would seem to be on minimum wage and labor dynamics in general. I understand that most of these content creators are from the global north, the US to be more specific. The reason behind that has a lot to do with how I was exposed to them in the first place. Remember the alt-right pipeline experience with Jordan Peterson and all? Like even for gaming, like most of the content creators that I watch are from these countries. So already my algorithm is skewed in favor of people from these countries. I haven't found anyone in Indonesia who's an out and about political YouTuber or live streamer. Like, we do have our own new wave of progressive media, such as Asumsi, Tirto, and Narasi TV, which I guess you can consider that as our own version of Vice News, which we do have our own Vice Indonesia, by the way. The thing is, well, they're news outlets. It's the broadcaster voice that I can never really get used to. It's so alien and manufactured. The majority of domestic political discourse that I've been able to find was, well, on Twitter, which was initially very much skewed towards reactionaries and right libertarians. It's to be expected, considering that the most political circle that I've engaged with was people from that right libertarian seminar. Fortunately, Twitter got a Twitter. These people started arguing against more left-leaning people, and as I gravitate more towards left-leaning ideas, I started following them. There's a whole list of them, like we're talking about people like Lincak, Faris Abdurrahman, Marlistia Citradingrum, Elisa Kalis Mardiasi, Discalmi, Julie, Haryati Sinaga, Fried Rice Angles. Really love the name there, by the way, Fried Rice Angles. And many, many more. Getting exposed to these people admittedly gave me a sigh of relief that there are actually left-leaning voices out there. We started this whole thing from my experience attending the right libertarian seminar, which basically initiated my journey into leftist politics. Then we talked about my fairly limited exposure to the alt-right pipeline, how then it led to me to learning about the fascinating concepts of worker co-ops and transgenderism, how then I realized that there is an entire community of content creators who engage in politics, the amount of things that I've been able to learn from them, their distinct styles and whatnot. After all that, you might be wondering, what the hell am I supposed to be taking away from this? Why does it matter? Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe through these videos, you would realize that, hey, there's more to YouTube than just gamers or makeup tutorials or immature man-children flexing their wealth, corrupting the youth into vacuous souls that care about nothing but money, and a very toxic understanding of expressing one's identity, which is actually rooted in insecurity. I guess that could be one. That's sure as hell how I felt when I was first exposed to these people. Also, the fact that they've been able to present it in such a casual setting. Again, it makes everything so grounded. That's pretty much my main goal, honestly. Like, I want to help make political discussions more mainstream, packaged in a way that is not alienating. Not exactly groundbreaking, I know. At a personal level, I'll admit that I want to come into this because there's something missing in my line of work: advocacy. You see, I'm an economist in one of these companies that are often referred to as the Big Four. I've learned a lot of things from working there, and to be perfectly real, I feel some kind of moral duty to share it. Something to note though is that I'm not trying to pose myself as some kind of expert or anything. I mentioned that most people's understanding of certain issues are limited to their knee-jerk reactions. What I didn't say is that I'm also like that for a variety of issues, which is what I intend to improve on as I go along. I want to go through more academic articles, the news, government publications, regulations. Like, I'll be honest, I've got like a pretty long list of bookmark articles that I've been dying to go through for the next pseudo-intellectual mumbo-jumbo. As mentioned earlier, I already have a script covering worker co-ops that's almost ready. It's still an introductory type of video. Hopefully it's not going to be any longer than 30 minutes like this series. In the background, I would very much like to tune in to more Indonesian podcasts, whether it is on YouTube or Spotify. Because who knows, maybe there are political content creators, but they've been doing it in a more subtle way. We need to acknowledge the fact that most people, they're generally disaffected by politics. It's so ingrained already that politicians are inherently corrupt, and there's just nothing that we can do about it. Abandoning the sheer thought that things don't have to be this way. This poses a challenge when you want to get people politically engaged. You need a more approachable method. Pretty much what these content creators have been doing. Pretty much what I wanted to do. I'll try to be conscious to not come off as terminally online. Like, I hope it's not too annoying whenever I try to explain specifically online terms. I do this because I know that my social circle is so foreign to this whole thing. There are times when I screenshot articles and post it on Instagram story, where then I would comment something like based or pog. And some people actually come to me and ask, what the fuck is based and pog? like I couldn't help but feel like that Breaking Bad meme where Jesse was saying based and pog, and then Walter White reacted, what the fuck are you talking about? Honestly, even the alt-right pipeline experience, that's a very US concept, which is why my video on that subject is fairly limited. Let me expand that a bit. I can understand if some of you, especially if you're from Indonesia, if you're confused with that video. If you're familiar with the subject, you might actually find the video to be a bit underwhelming. My experience does not involve something like, oh, I fell into this rabbit hole where I eventually found myself in some dodgy websites which may or may not have started from some Reddit forum or Discourse server. Also, and I think I've mentioned this in the alt-right pipeline video, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Jordan Peterson, they're not exactly the bastion of the alt-right. Like, for instance, Jordan Peterson, I cited his interview with Vice News, right? When basically he said, women are just asking for it. In the same interview though, when asked about his advice for people of the alt-right, he basically said, grow up. Another factor is that what the alt-right believes in, specifically in a Western sense, is, well, very Western. Tautological, I know, but what I'm trying to say is that they're so focused on white supremacy, and their main enemy is the Jewish people. So yeah, I'm already alienated by it. Like, hashtag not relatable. Even if we are to internationalize this a bit by removing the racial aspect and instead focus on the blatant isolationism and conservatism, I'm just too much of an optimist to share their feeling of disillusionment with the modern era. Their religious fundamentalist angle? Well, I'm pretty irreligious to begin with, so even the Indonesian version of the alt-right is never appealing either. If anything, I dread the fact that there is a growing sentiment of turning Indonesia into a caliphate or an Islamic state. Sorry, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. Like, although it's not entirely irrelevant, like in the grand scheme of things, but I feel like I would be doing myself a disservice if I don't at least touch my alt-right pipeline video, limited or otherwise. There's something to be drawn from all this though, and that is the importance of having strong moral grounds. If it wasn't for the fact that I come into their videos already believing that there is something inherently wrong with how businesses are run, that it breeds inequality, or if I were still living with my mom and still interact with her family, which is very materialistic and often look down on poor people, I might actually become a right libertarian. Who knows? Combine that with the fact that I used to read a lot of Robert Kiyosaki, the whole cash flow quadrant shit. I'm actually licking the boots of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, thinking that they're the savior of mankind from the corrupt bureaucrats. However, morals can only go so far. You still need to be able to defend it, especially when it's against the common belief. I sure as I'll know that it's going to be an uphill battle, like trying to convince people to regain their trust in politics, or to convince people that the LGBTQ community is not some Western ideology infiltrating Indonesia to destroy its civilization. But hey, I'm all for it. By the end of the day, they're still people. Some of them are simply misinformed. Sure, there's bound to be some people who would intentionally misunderstand you, but hey, let's do our best, huh? With that, this concludes the Getting Exposed to Left Discourse series. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop a comment down below, ring the notification bell icon so that every time I upload a video, it goes right to your feed. Links to my socials in the end card and in the description down below. Be on the lookout of my future live streams on Twitch. That's it. Yeah. That is all from me for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.